Marcus Haggins strikes. It is the first domino off the board for wide receiver recruits in the class of 2024. Tyseer Denmark commits to Penn State, the first of potentially 3, maybe 4 wide receivers in this class. And all I got to say is, how's it feel, Oregon?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Zach Sako. I am your host of the show, and I am joined by the man himself, former ESPN Radio State College broadcaster, did the Penn State Tailgate Show, was my partner in crime for Blue and White Breakdown. That is Matt Bortner, now with Leitner Communications in Altoona. Matt, it was great to see you again. And this, it feels natural, right? Anytime we get to do a show together like this.
Yep. Just picking up where we left off. So always happy to talk Penn State with you, Zach.
Yeah, and a lot of good news for Penn State to talk about. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and they're going to throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. That is birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And this show is the official go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Penn State rivals, go check them out if you haven't already, and keep doing so if you are. HappyValleyInsider.com for all the latest, especially with Penn State recruiting, which is what Matt and I are going to talk about in this episode. Matt, before we move further, where can people keep up with what you do?
The best place is going to be Twitter. That is M_Bortner on Twitter. Just have, any updates I get throughout the beat or just some of my commentary. So that's the best place to check any of my stuff.
And you got Happy Valley Insider, my personal account at Zach_Sako, and the Locked On Nittany Twitter. You can follow those all as well. Okay. Tyseer Denmark officially flips to Penn State. Ooh, doesn't that how the turntables, Oregon? Yeah. With you get Michael Van Buren now. Tyseer Denmark is Penn State Nittany Lion. So I like this trade. We're going to talk about that one, plus the overall outlook of the 2024 class. And then Seth, Lundy, and Jalen Pickett are going to be making history. That's going to be in the final segment. Matt, your instant reaction to Penn State getting a 4-star wide receiver, its first wide receiver commit in the class of 2024.
Well, I think that's the biggest part is what you just said is their first wide receiver commit for a good class that they have upcoming for 2024 right now, which, they've checked a lot of the boxes that you want to see. The offensive line, they got their quarterback, they got a running back, they got a little bit of everything except wide receiver until now. So Denmark not only checks that box, but he is a quality wide receiver, a 4-star that you just mentioned. And now Penn State has the top 3 recruits out of Pennsylvania. From most places will say that 1 through 3 in Pennsylvania. So they get to keep their guy in state and, flipping him from Oregon, who is, they are most always a school that is really good on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, Oregon's been I would say a thorn in the side of some East Coast schools.
Yep.
They've been able to cherry pick select top talent from Pennsylvania and Maryland, right? Michael Van Buren, we saw him be almost a lock to go to Penn State. And then all of a sudden, Oregon makes its pitch. We know that NIL is extremely involved here. So Tyseer Denmark's recruitment is interesting. And I'm going to channel a little bit of what Adam Friedman said in the past podcast. Go check that out if you want to get a more in-depth look at the recruiting angle about it. But Denmark was down to Oregon and Ohio State. Penn State wasn't even really factored in. And what's the difference now, Matt, between the past Penn State and this current Penn State team, this coaching staff? No Taylor Stubblefield, and you have Marcus Haggins in place. So he said family culture was a big deal to him. I imagine location was it at the end of the day. And I know Penn State got involved with some NIL money. Don't get me wrong. That's just the name of the game in college athletics right now. But I feel like when you go to Roman Catholic in Philadelphia, you and your family are going to want to be 2.5 hours, 3 hours rather than a whole plane ride over to the west side of the country.
Yeah, if those are your top priorities, having I think Haggins come on board, and not saying that Stubblefield, didn't have those values of culture and everything like that. Everything I knew from him being at Penn State, he was a good guy and he was nice to work with in the media. But I know Haggins has really talked about how big relationships are for him.
Yep.
That's the reason why he came to Penn State. And again, not taken away from Virginia, but it was the reason why he came to Penn State and came from Virginia, where he had spent his whole coaching career at. So I think that speaks volumes of what he fits in with at Penn State, what his priorities lie within. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably, one of the factors with Denmark. Denmark talked about, the personal connections. So that seemed to be, with location as well. I think that has to be one of the main factors of why Denmark sort of backs away from Oregon and comes to Penn State.
Yeah, and if you look at Penn State's class of 2024, out of the 6 top prospects, this is according to Happy Valley Insiders, Rivals, right? Penn State's 5 out of the 6 of them are from Pennsylvania. So the best in Pennsylvania, stay in Pennsylvania. Say it with me, folks. Quentin Martin, according to Happy Valley Insider Rivals, is the top prospect in this class. And then Tyseer Denmark and then Cooper Cousins. Depending where you look, they might flip-flop. Cousins might be 2. Quentin Martin is the consensus 1. But Denmark and Cousins seem to flip back and forth between number 2 and number 3 overall in this class.
And you got to think too, that was one of the biggest criticisms of, James Franklin's and his staff in the past years. And now we've seen it flip, is that, he said dominate the state in terms of recruiting. And that wasn't always the case. We're starting to see that tide sort of shift over to Penn State's favor.
Denmark, 4-star. He's rated a 5.9 according to Rivals. Matt, who do you think of when you see Tyseer Denmark? And I know anything can happen with these prospects, right? Caden Saunders was a highly touted prospect a year ago. He's still coming into his own. But when you look at some of the tape of Denmark, when you see the highlights, who, for a former Penn State player, who comes to mind?
I don't know if I think one guy specifically, but I think what is interesting here is, if you look at Penn State's track record in recent years of guys that aren't exactly huge in stature, they've had a lot of success with some of these speedsters, like a Denmark, who's only 5'11". You think of KJ Hamler. You think of Tazhawn Denmark, who wasn't huge. Parker Washington wasn't enormous by any means either. So I think he fits a mold that has been successful at Penn State.
Yeah, and that's what Marcus Haggins is too. Kind of that all-around. He's not your big body type. That's what Nick Marsh is supposed to be, that Juwan Johnson. I'll even throw it back to Irvin Charles, right? Johnson and Charles were in that same time frame.
Yeah, but Chris Godwin's the one that comes out to mind of your prototypical guy.
Yeah, but Chris Godwin 6'2", 6'3", right? And you mentioned that Denmark might maybe become 6 foot, 6'1" when all's said and done. He's still 16. He's still 17, 18 years old, right? But Denmark, I'm glad you brought up Tazhawn Denmark, because it's that number 1 route running. Basically, he's unguardable. Sure, you can match up with him in size, but he's going to beat you with his smarts. He's going to beat you with his route running, being able to cut on a dime. And I like that they have these 2 things in common. Both of them were committed to a Pac-12 school. James Franklin has the conversation, and then they flip back over to the Nittany Lions. So for those who don't remember, Tazhawn Denmark was committed to UCLA at one point and then did flip to Happy Valley. And look at the career he had and a nice start to his NFL career as well. So
where's the number 5 too? And he said, some of that is he really likes Tazhawn Denmark's game. So
it's the right game.
That wouldn't be bad if he came out with that type of production.
So the outlook for the 2024 class is looking better every single day, even though Florida's been really annoying lately. I will say that. We're going to talk about the outlook next, get into the NBA draft in the final segment. But before we get to that, let's hear from our sponsor of today's episode, and that is Birddogs. Are you looking for great shorts and pants? Well, This episode sponsored by Birddogs. You're going to learn just about that. Birddogs pants and shorts are great for 3 reasons. First, the fit. You will look better and feel great wearing Birddogs. Second, the comfort. Their stretchy fabric will make your legs look great, and they're comfier than all your other shorts and pants. And then finally, versatility. They give you the freedom to wear one pair of shorts, one pair of pants to the golf course, to a meeting, on a date, hanging out with friends, you name it. I've never had a pair of Birddogs myself, so I said, I'm going to go out and order a pair since they're sponsoring this great show. I got a pair, and I'll tell you what, they live up to the billing. I got a pair of shorts for that matter as well because it is summer, but I can attest to how great they are. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code LockedOnCollege, easy enough, for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That is birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We can promise you that. And thanks again for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch. You got to check this one out. Don't miss Locked On NBA Draft live Thursday night. That's going to be tonight. Pick-by-pick analysis from our stable of Locked On NBA hosts, national reaction from our NBA Big Board hosts, and live check-ins from inside the NBA Draft. Locked On NBA Draft live starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, Thursday night, on the Locked On NBA YouTube page. Go check it out. And our final segment is going to be devoted to a portion of the NBA draft because 2 guys are going to be making history, 2 former Nittany Lions. And why don't we throw in what's going on with that basketball tournament with John Hare at the end as well, Matt. But back to Penn State recruiting. The football team looks good. If you go to Rivals right now, Penn State is number 7 in the country. Depending on where you look, the rankings differentiate, but I'm going to trust Rivals here. And Rivals actually has them the highest at number 7, 10 4-star commits, 8 3-stars. And that's going to change, right? If you look through that class and it's like, well, 8 3-stars, who are the 3-stars? Some of which are John Mitchell, who deserves to be ranked higher. I would say Ethan Grunkmeyer is still someone that is
going to be going up. You know, he's gotten early raves.
Yeah. He was top, right? He finished top 10 at the Elite 11. So you mean to tell me that a top 10 quarterback in the nation isn't a 3-star? They're going to update that, right? But just looking at that. So don't say, well, Penn State, they have too many 3-stars. They're not getting those 4-star, 5-stars that Ohio State and Michigan are getting. They are still... They get in at the ground level. The everydayers on the show know this, and how many times I've said this. You and I have said this. Jason and I have said this, that they get in at the ground level and they ride the elevator all the way to the top. Let's take Luke Reynolds, for example. Luke Reynolds can end up being a top 5 tight end when all's said and done. And he was an afterthought as a 3-star because he started out as a quarterback and then he moved to tight end. So that's what Penn State does. Same thing with Ethan Grunkmeyer. Playing at a school that's not exactly a powerhouse, but Ethan Grunkmeyer has made them better. And you look at the production he's had despite playing bigger schools, despite playing better competition, and you see what he does now on the national stage. So the outlook of this class, definitely top 10. Okay, I can say that.
Yeah.
Do they push into the top 5? It is going to be difficult because schools like Alabama, I will throw in Miami of Florida, even though they've had the situation with Life Wallet, John Ruiz, allegedly, right? I don't want to say, I don't want them to see this podcast and then they're like, legal action, right? But they've had situations now with the NIL funding, allegedly. And those schools right now have limited commits because in Texas, right? I think of Texas, Alabama, Miami of Florida, LSU, those schools are going to push Penn. Yeah. Well, Georgia's already number 1, right? But those other schools that have, like, let's take Alabama, for example. And I want to pull this up because I want to get this right. Matt, just give me your best guess, because I don't know if you have this pulled up in front of you. Where do you think Alabama stands on this day in late June in the recruiting rankings? Just your best guess.
I'm actually going to guess maybe around like 15. They seem to be a school that, some of those top dogs at the end that they end up getting and then rise to the top.
26.
Okay. Yeah.
26. But that's
That'll
my
change.
that's my point, right? Yeah. Alabama's not going to stay at 26.
Yeah.
They're going to eventually vault their way up to the top 5. They will be in the top 5 when all said and done. So Penn State, who's hovering around the top 5, you got to imagine that schools like Alabama will bump them down a couple of spots. But I could see, do you think they will finish at 7? Because I think that's at 7 or 8. I think that's a safe place for them in the class of 2024.
Yeah, I think so. The only way they go higher is if they really compete for that Big Ten title this year. If they get some late flips, then I think that would be the way that they push into the top 5. But I think, anywhere from top 7 to top 15 is probably, the zone they land in. But that's by no means is that a bad thing. You would be saying, I think 3 years in a row now would be a top 15 class 3 years in a row. And that's what Penn State's been looking for. They've had those couple years where they've had really great classes. Then they've had, just the top 25. But right now they're riding on that consistent level of recruiting.
Yeah, they need more of what's been identical to that class of 2022, right? Drew Aller, Denai Dennis Sutton, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. I could go on and on and on, but that's that going back to the Micah Parsons class, right? It's those ones that have that identity of being either at or near the top 5, which these have been they've been solidified in the top 10. So what's missing from this class, Matt? I think Penn State, if the everydayers know this from other episodes, that Penn State is very close to landing. We have the first one off the board, right, with Denmark, but then there's Nick Marsh, who's projected to Penn State. Then there is Josiah Brown, Peter Gonzalez. Penn State is hosting other wide receiver commits as well. They could ultimately get, I teased that it was 3 wide receivers. They could get 4, possibly even 5.
Yeah.
So what's missing for you?
I think that's exactly the position. They get a good start yesterday, and then they got to get, I think, at least 3, just how the wide receiver room is right now. They could end up, a lot of those guys this year, stepping up, and it's not as big of a worry as it is right now when we look at the end of the year. But right now, I think you can't have enough wide receivers in that room because competition wise, you need to find more depth there and more proven guys. So I think that's really the position you're looking for. I'm really pleased with how the offensive line recruiting is looking. And that's something I look at every year, because now that Penn State is in a position where, they're too deep at every position on the offensive line, that's something you have to maintain, because if you fall off of that level, it just takes a couple of injuries to really put you in a pickle. And I think that's, last year that was Penn State's saving grace, that they were able to plug and play at that position and keep, an admirable performance at that position.
Yeah, I would say that if I'm going to give folks a full list of who they need, obviously wide receiver, right? You want at least 3 more of those guys that Penn State is targeting. You want them in this class of 2024. I will say a second tight end. I don't know who that's necessarily going to be. I love the idea of Caleb Oden committing to Penn State. And then you have Luke Reynolds and Caleb Oden basically being that next version of Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson in some sort of sense, right? That athletic over the top tight end. And then you're more of your blocking, short distance, quick pass safety blanket type of guy.
Especially because of how many tight ends Penn State uses too.
In this offense. Right. Right. And Penn State there has been no drop off since Ty Hall has taken over as the tight ends coach. So Penn State is still becoming that's a premium position for Penn State in terms of development. Again, Mike Gesicki, Pat Fryermuth, Brenton Strange. The list continues. Defensive line is an obvious. Defensive tackle, defensive end, defensive playmaker. Right. I was upset when Jamonte Waller committed to Florida. I really thought that Penn State had that pitch where they said, "Hey, you're basically going to be the next Abdul Carter." who is that going to be now? I feel like they still need that iconic, that next guy to take over that spot, because Carter's only going to be here for 2 more years. So who's going to be that next guy? Not a true freshman. I think that's very tough to do. You'd like to think that the next number 11 will be a true freshman and step into that role immediately, but easier said than done. Abdul Carter, Micah Parsons are one of a kind, and that's very rare to find. So I thought Jamonte Waller would have really put this class over the top, and he goes elsewhere. So they need that defensive playmaker, whether they end up at defensive end or they become that off-ball linebacker that does a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think what's so hard. I think at this level, I mean, defensive tackle. I think you hit it spot on there. I mean, that's a spot Penn State's looking for depth and just an ultimate playmaker. But there's not a lot of 300-pound guys just walking around there every day that are ready to plug and play at the defensive tackle position. A lot of times, it's guys that make the transition from a defensive end to D tackle or another position. So, that's sometimes hard to project at this stage. But I feel like it's, one of these times Penn State's got to be able to land one of those top guys that, from the beginning is going to be a defensive tackle.
Yeah, and I think that's just about it for Penn State's class, because they have the 2 running backs. They had, up until Derek Plaz had decommitted, the Penn State had 6 offensive line, at least guys who could play offensive line. We don't know what position they'll ultimately finish with, but you had 6 options there. Now you have 5, right?
Yep.
And then that second tight end to go along with it, the wide receivers. Do they need a second quarterback in this class? We'll finish with that.
I don't think it's necessary. It's always nice to pick up 2 in a class, but I think with Smolik waiting in the wings too, which we've heard good things about him, I don't think that's a complete necessity. Because also too, I think you got to look at it this way too with quarterback, is that you also have the option of bringing in another guy through the transfer portal always if you need to. So I don't think 2 in a class is, as important as it was before, but it's always nice to have 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Penn State is really in a really good spot for the class of 2024.
And defensive side, secondary, they got pieces everywhere there too. So it's a well-rounded, I think, for the most part, class.
Yeah, that's why I didn't mention secondary, because they have, I think, 4 or 5 defensive backs now, and they're still targeting more players out of the secondary. So we'll see. And athletes in general, Josiah Brown's somebody that projects as a wide receiver, but could ultimately play as a defensive back. If you want more on that, check out happyvalleyinsider.com for all the latest in Penn State recruiting. More commitments are going to be arriving soon. So check out Happy Valley Insider and, of course, Locked On Nittany Lions for all of that. Matt, in this final segment, Penn State basketball deserves a shout out, because even though Micah Shrewsbury's not here anymore, but a couple of his former players, Seth Lundy, Jalen Pickett, are getting ready to be drafted. At the airing of this episode, it will be tonight, Thursday, June 22nd. Seth Lundy, Jalen Pickett, going to make history, because Penn State has never had 2 players drafted in an NBA draft. They're both going to go in the second round, but I still respect the way that both Lundy and Pickett went from guys who were fringe, maybe 60th picks and undrafted signees, to probably going to be picked in the top 40.
The funny thing is, I guess it's though from watching them game in and game out, but I looked at Lundy maybe about mid to late season last year, even before the tournaments. And he's just got that NBA body to him.
Yep.
So I remember even mentioning, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a guy that, sneaks up on the NBA draft radar, and then he goes and kills it in the tournament. He kills it in the combine, especially in the scrimmage part. He's not as quick as you would want somebody to be at his size, but he's a good enough defender. He's not, when it comes to NBA quickness, he'll never be an elite defender in the NBA, but he can score. He's athletic. So I think, if he sneaks up to earlier in the second round, this is a guy that can probably at some point play on an NBA roster in year one. Jalen Pickett, I see as more of a late second round guy in that final round. And I don't know if I see it in year one. He's probably still has as well-rounded as he is. He's just doesn't have that NBA athleticism. So there's probably some development that needs to be done there, but he obviously has the skill set to maybe play one day in the NBA as well.
Let's talk about what Lundy and Pickett have going for them. Okay, so for Seth Lundy, I'll back that up again. The three-point shooting and the way that the NBA has transitioned as a league. Years ago, right, 10, 15 years ago, Zach Edey and Hunter Dickinson would be the first two picks off the board. That is not, Edey might get taken in the very late second round when he goes out, but there's a reason he didn't go in this NBA draft, because scouts told him, you're not getting picked, and you unfortunately don't have as bright of a future here in this league with the way it's spread out, the faster it runs. It shows, because Purdue, again, knocked out in the first round by a double-digit seed. Besides the point, Lundy, he's quick. He's got the prototypical body, as you mentioned, for that ideal two guard, that combo guard, and he can shoot the three, as he showed in those scrimmage combines.
And not only shoot, he can create his own three-pointer as well.
He can create his own shot as well,
which is huge.
And then for Jalen Pickett, right, he's your uncle at the barbecue. That's what. Hey, I'm taking that from other people that have said that about him. He basically plays pickup basketball. So it'll be interesting, because you can't play with your back to the basket in the NBA. So I'm interested to see what Jalen Pickett does to adapt his game. I know he will. It's just a matter of how and how long that takes. But he's a versatile defender. He can guard just about anybody. People compared him, at least some scouts, when they talked to Steve Jones, who was on a recent podcast, they compared him to Jalen Brunson. I thought that was pretty high praise. We know that Pickett can run the point. He could play the two. He could play the three. He's not going to play the three in the NBA, but he played positionless basketball when he was at Penn State. That goes a long way in the NBA. He can be the point guard. He can be your two for that professional team. And what Lundy and Pickett both have going for them is they are older. They are not 18 years old. They have a lot of college basketball logged.
Polished.
Yeah, they're polished, and that is going to be a benefit on the roster. I think the bar is obviously set by Lamar Stevens, who selectively gets minutes for the Cavaliers. Do you see them having the same type of career as Stevens, or do you think one of them or both of them will be better when all's said and done?
Yeah, I'm not certain that Jalen Pickett will ever see the NBA floor. I just think of those limitations that we talk about, and just the way it transfers to the NBA game isn't as beneficial for him. But I think no matter what, he'll make a lot of money playing professional basketball, even if it's not in the NBA. Seth Lundy, I think he's got a shot to, really be a role player on a successful team. I don't know that he's a guy that's going to see a ton of minutes every night, but I think he has enough skill that he can produce and, have some games where he can help an NBA team win a game or two.
And then, so best of luck to them. We know that they're both going to get drafted tonight. Well, it's a safe bet, right? That both of the Nittany Lions are going to get picked, and it'll set a precedent for Penn State, and it will make history for Penn State basketball as well. Hopefully, Mike Rhodes can continue that trend by sending guys, make them good in college, and then send them off to the professional leagues here in the United States. Speaking of not quite pro, but it is a pro-style basketball league, and that is the basketball tournament featuring the Happy Valley Hoopers. So Matt, general manager is John Hara, who of course will go down as one of the greatest Nittany Lion basketball players in history.
Hard to tell him no too if he asks you to play on your team. All that he's done.
But they've been accumulating former Penn State men's basketball talent over the course. It's just great to see. Every time I blink, there's boom, it's Shep Gardner. Boom, it's Miles Dredd. Somebody is coming back to play on this tournament basketball team. And Penn State now knows its fate of who they're going to play. I want to make sure I get this right, because they are in fact going to play the Nerd team, and that's Monday, July 24th. I know, but this tournament's massive. It is huge. It consists consists of what looks to be about, I think that's 68 teams, might even be, or 64 teams, might even be more here. But
if they win, they would play, I think, Boeheim's Army, which is a staple of that tournament, and a lot of good Syracuse alum in that team.
Yeah, so Penn State definitely has its work cut out for them. Their Jamari Wheeler's coming back for this team, so it's good to see him be a good guy again, right? But
not in those ugly scarlet and gray.
Yeah, but the Happy Valley Hoopers, do you have high expectations for them? They are a 6 seed in their side of the bracket.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can fare pretty well. They've got some, Josh Reeves, I think, is a player that fits perfectly for that. He can defend, he can get to the rim. And they've got some 3-point shooters. They got scrappy guy like John Hara. I don't know what Mike Watkins, what his playing shape is like now, but I mean, I think they can win a couple games, but I'm just more interested in seeing those guys because a lot of those guys had some fantastic careers for Penn State and, really helped build to where Penn State is now in a bright future for the Nittany Lions, it looks.
Will you watch that opening round game that they play in? I will.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now that Penn State basketball is definitely fun again. I'm so glad it's fun, and Mike Rhodes is gonna make it even more entertaining as time goes on. Matt, I really appreciate the time. Another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions is in the book. One final time, I do want to shout out Locked On NBA Draft live tonight, Thursday, June 22nd, pick-by-pick analysis from our staple of NBA hosts. National reaction from our NBA Big Board hosts and live check-ins from inside the NBA Draft. Locked On NBA Draft live starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on the Locked On NBA YouTube page. Matt, before I let you go, where can people keep up with everything you do?
Yep, as I mentioned before, on Twitter, M_Bortner, and I chime in quite a bit on Penn State news. So check me out there.
Matt, thanks for the time, and looking forward to the next time we can have another conversation.
Always a pleasure, buddy.